A disturbing and dangerous ideological turn has overtaken a large portion of the American conservative movement during the past several decades, and more precipitously, during the past few years. This combination of anti-intellectualism, religious zealotry and intolerance, the desire to micro-regulate the personal lives of millions of Americans, and the abandonment of the ideas of individual liberty, limited government, and free markets, can best be called pop-conservatism, characterized as it is by a populist appeal to the masses, rather than a sophisticated appeal to the intelligent layman. Some, though by no means all, of pop-conservatism's representatives occupy leadership roles in media, politics, and religion. Television commentators such as Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity, editorial writers like Ann Coulter and Michelle Malkin, political candidates like Sarah Palin, religious figures like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, and even former presidents such as George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush can be characterized as pop-conservatives. Pop-conservatism currently dominates the platforms and methods of the majority of Republican Party candidates and officials. Indeed, it can be safely said that the Republican Party has become, perhaps irremediably, the party of pop-conservatism. Here, the major elements of pop-conservatism and their dangers shall be identified, and remedies to this movement shall be proposed. If individual liberty is to be preserved against a massive growth of regulations and restrictions, it is imperative that the name of freedom does not become tainted by association with an agenda that is antithetical to it. Pop-conservatism represents a distinct departure from earlier, more sophisticated strains of conservative thought, represented by thinkers such as Russell Kirk, Richard Weaver, Alan Bloom, C.S. Lewis, and William F. Buckley Jr. Moreover, pop-conservatism is practically antithetical to the ideas of such intellectual free market thinkers as Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Murray Rothbard, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, and Ron Paul. Neither the former set of more so-called traditional conservatives, whom we shall call the serious conservatives, nor the latter set of advocates of free markets and individual liberty, whom, despite the somewhat simplistic terminology that this would require, we shall call the serious libertarians, would at all welcome the pop-conservative emergence. Whatever their differences, earlier strains of serious 20th century conservatism and libertarianism were alike in a desire to elevate the positive and normative understanding of the world exhibited by the general public. Major arms of serious conservative and libertarian movements have been profoundly intellectual in their efforts to inform the general public's understanding of liberty, culture, economics, philosophy, and political theory. Pop-conservatism does the exact opposite of uplifting the general public. Rather, it intellectually descends to the level of the lowest common denominator in order to garner votes, attendance at rallies, large audiences for radio and television shows, and readership from an insufficiently educated and sophisticated demographic. The verbal encapsulation of this approach can be found in Sarah Palin's September 30th, 2008 statement that it's time that normal Joe Six-Pack American is finally represented in the position of vice presidency. In effect, Palin was proudly claiming to be no better than her constituents, as a result of which it would make no sense for her constituents to delegate to her any manner of political power, since they could have personally accomplished the objectives for which such power would be delegated just as well or better than Sarah Palin could. The very designation of Joe Sixpack is not only profoundly insulting, but it perpetuates pride in a self-destructive, mindless cultural image that has done damage to large segments of the American population. A Joe Sixpack is by definition a person of no distinction, no great accomplishments, no noble aspirations, no extraordinary abilities or virtues. He is just the average Joe. What human being with a shred of dignity would wish to be called this? Moreover, a Joe Sixpack is intemperate in his alcohol consumption, indolent, not particularly eloquent, and often anti-intellectual himself. He holds a snide contempt for people of learning, the sophisticates of this world. He holds prejudices against cosmopolitan culture and toleration, and against the exhibition of universal decency toward all human beings, irrespective of their race, religion, or ethnicity. A Joe Sixpack is a localist by mentality, who is almost obsessively fearful of the unusual, the foreign, the folks who ain't from around here, said in the dialect of your choice. In some incarnations, a Joe Sixpack also exhibits a frightening degree of machismo, a relishing of violence, of blood, sweat, and tears sacrifice, and a contempt for all intellectual matters and white-collar paper-pushing work as the occupation of effeminate so-called pansies. Never mind that the pansies, by this definition, have included all the great philosophers, scientists, inventors, and entrepreneurs of history, the creators of all human civilization. To demolish the Joe Sixpack stereotype as dangerous and destructive is not to insult lower-income Americans. Rather, it is to suggest that virtually all lower-income Americans can do better than to follow the Joe Sixpack role model, and indeed, many of them have done better. The tragedy of pop-conservatism is that it greatly underestimates the intellectual capacities of its audience, which, with a modicum of guidance and instruction, can understand advanced political and economic concepts that are crucial to the functioning of a free society. Many of the speeches of Grover Cleveland, Calvin Coolidge, and even Ronald Reagan show that it is possible to popularize sophisticated ideas without diluting them or diminishing those ideas' influence. Unfortunately, the pop conservatives' approach has entirely jettisoned the more refined arguments propagated by these statesmen of the past.